In the quiet village of Pakistani, Cambodia, under the oppressive heat of the tropical sun, a child was born into a modest rural family. His name was Saloth Sar, later known to the world as Pol Pot. The boy grew up surrounded by rice paddies and traditional Khmer customs, in a country still under French colonial rule.
Exciting news. Before we get into today's video, I've got an amazing opportunity for you. Have you ever wanted to learn Hebrew? Now's your chance. We're offering a unique beginner Hebrew class, and the best part? You set your own budget. That's right, you decide how much you want to invest in your Hebrew learning journey, and we'll review your registration to make it work for you. To get you started, we're offering 3 free introductory classes. No commitments, just a fantastic opportunity to see how enjoyable and rewarding learning Hebrew can be.
Very good, Barach. If you find the beginning of a verb, of a shoresh, one of our 3...
So why wait? Dive into Hebrew today and explore a rich new language and culture. Click the link in the description to sign up now and start your Hebrew journey. All right, let's get back to the video.
The son of a relatively prosperous farmer, Saloth Sar seemed destined for an unremarkable life. But as he played barefoot in the dusty fields, the seeds of discontent were already taking root in the nation around him. French colonialism had left a deep scar on the Cambodian people, creating a simmering tension that would one day explode. Unbeknownst to those around him, this quiet, unassuming boy would rise to lead a revolution that would change the fate of Cambodia forever. In his mind would form a vision so radical, so devoid of humanity, that it would lead to the deaths of nearly a quarter of his country's population. This was no ordinary child. The story of Pol Pot, the man who would bring his nation to its knees, begins here, in the stillness of the Cambodian countryside, long before his name became synonymous with terror. In 1949, a young Saloth Sar boarded a ship bound for Paris, France, leaving behind the rice fields and the temples of Cambodia for the grand boulevards and intellectual salons of Europe. For a rural boy from Pakistani, this was a journey into an entirely new world, one filled with the allure of modernity, the hum of political ideas, and the promise of education. In Paris, Saloth Sar walked among towering cathedrals and debated in smoky cafes. The city, alive with the aftermath of World War II, was a crucible of ideas. It was here, amidst the ruins of Europe's empires, that he encountered the writings of Marx, Lenin, and Mao Zedong. The promise of a classless, utopian society captivated him. The teachings of Marxist-Leninist ideology spoke to his growing resentment of colonialism and inequality in Cambodia. As he immersed himself in these revolutionary doctrines, Sar joined the French Communist Party, a group of fervent intellectuals who dreamed of dismantling old systems and forging new ones from their ashes. But his quiet demeanor hid an unshakable determination. While others saw theory, Sar began to envision how these ideas could be imposed, not in abstract debates, but on the flesh and blood of his own people. Paris was more than a city of enlightenment for Saloth Sar. It was the forge where his radical beliefs were sharpened, where a young student became a revolutionary. Beneath the city's shimmering lights, the seeds of Cambodia's darkest days were quietly, inexorably being sown. In 1953, Saloth Sar stepped off a boat onto Cambodian soil, the sun beating down on the land he had not seen in years. But the boy who had once wandered the quiet fields of Pakistani had been transformed. Behind his calm demeanor lay a fire stoked by the revolutionary ideas he had absorbed in Paris. Cambodia, still under French rule, was ripe for change, and Saloth Sar returned not as a student, but as a man with a mission. The streets of Phnom Penh buzzed with whispers of resistance. Across the country, the people were restless, tired of colonial exploitation and the foreign boots that trampled their sovereignty. Sar found himself among a growing network of rebels, monks, peasants, and intellectuals, united by a shared dream of independence. In the shadows of Cambodia's forests, Sar joined the anti-colonial resistance, embracing the struggle against French imperialism. He was no longer just a participant. He was an observer, quietly learning, adapting, and preparing. As independence loomed on the horizon, Sar's gaze extended beyond liberation from colonial rule. He envisioned a new Cambodia, one free not only of foreign domination, but of the old social hierarchies and traditions he saw as shackles on progress. By the time Cambodia gained its independence in 1953, Saloth Sar had transitioned deeper into the communist movement, a clandestine group working to reshape the country's destiny. Beneath the cover of night, he whispered promises of revolution to those around him, planting the seeds of what would one day grow into the Khmer Rouge. The quiet revolutionary had returned to his homeland, but his dreams of freedom were destined to lead Cambodia down a far darker path. By 1963, Cambodia was a nation simmering with tension, caught between the Cold War's rival ideologies and the growing unrest of its own people. In the hidden depths of the jungle, far from the gleaming spires of Phnom Penh, a secret movement was gaining strength. At its helm, a quiet but ruthless figure emerged, Saloth Sar, now known by a new name, Pol Pot. Elected as the leader of the Communist Party of Kampuchea, CPK, Pol Pot took control of a movement still in its infancy. The CPK, later known to the world as the Khmer Rouge, was a shadow organization, operating in the jungles and back alleys, whispering of a revolution that would purge Cambodia of corruption, inequality, and foreign influence. Pol Pot was not an orator like Mao, nor a warrior like Ho Chi Minh. He was something more elusive, a ghost in the trees, a figure who worked from the shadows, shaping his ideology in secret. Under his leadership, the party grew more radical. Inspired by Maoist thought and the Cultural Revolution in China, he envisioned an extreme form of communism, a society stripped of all class distinctions, where cities were emptied, money was abolished, and the past was erased. But power would not come easily. The Cambodian government, under Prince Norodom Sihanouk, hunted the communists, forcing Pol Pot and his followers deep into the remote jungles. There, among the thick canopy and endless dirt roads, he built the foundation of his army. To the outside world, he was still just a name in the shadows. But within the ranks of his followers, he was becoming something more, a leader, a prophet of destruction, a man who would soon plunge Cambodia into one of the darkest chapters in human history. Cambodia trembled as the old order collapsed. In March 1970, while Prince Norodom Sihanouk was abroad, a sudden and violent coup d'etat erupted in Phnom Penh. The streets buzzed with uncertainty as General Lon Nol, backed by the United States, seized power, ending Cambodia's fragile neutrality in the Cold War. The monarchy was overthrown, and with it, the illusion of stability. Prince Sihanouk, exiled and humiliated, sought refuge not in Western allies but in the unlikeliest of hands, the Khmer Rouge, the very communist guerrillas he once condemned. From exile in China, he called upon his supporters to take up arms against Lon Nol's new regime. For Pol Pot and the Khmer Rouge, this was the opportunity they had been waiting for. The enemy was now clear, and the war for Cambodia's soul had begun. The countryside boiled with unrest as peasants, still loyal to Sihanouk, flocked to the Khmer Rouge in droves. What had once been a small, fragmented insurgency was now a growing army, fueled by anger, disillusionment, and the promise of vengeance. Meanwhile, Lon Nol's government, emboldened by American support, launched brutal crackdowns, deepening the people's resentment. The war in neighboring Vietnam had already spilled across Cambodia's borders, and now, bombs rained down on rural villages as the U.S. military intensified its secret bombing campaign against communist forces. In the chaos, Pol Pot thrived. He and his followers faded into the jungles, watching as the government's grip on the country weakened. The Khmer Rouge was no longer just a movement, it was becoming Cambodia's future. And soon that future would arrive in the form of bloodshed, revolution, and a genocide unlike any the world had ever seen. The streets of Phnom Penh were filled with the sound of victory, but it was a hollow, chilling triumph. On April 17, 1975, after years of brutal civil war, the Khmer Rouge marched into the capital, their black-clad soldiers moving like shadows through the city. Lon Nol's government had fallen, its soldiers either fleeing or surrendering. The people, weary of war, first greeted the new rulers with cautious hope. But that hope was a mirage. Within hours, the true face of the revolution was revealed. Pol Pot, now in full control, declared this moment as the rebirth of Cambodia, Year Zero. The past would be erased, history rewritten. There would be no more cities, no more schools, no more markets, no more money. The Khmer Rouge's vision was absolute. Cambodia would become a pure agrarian utopia, free from class, corruption, and foreign influence. Then came the exodus. With rifles raised and cold, emotionless orders, Khmer Rouge soldiers forced millions of people from their homes. The sick, the elderly, mothers clutching infants, all were driven out of the city at gunpoint, marching under the relentless sun toward an uncertain fate. Those who resisted were executed on the spot. Hospitals were emptied, their patients left to die on the streets. The once bustling capital became a ghost town overnight. As the people trudged toward the countryside, a silent horror settled over Cambodia. What had begun as a revolution was rapidly transforming into something far darker. The Khmer Rouge had not simply seized power, they had declared war on their own people. The killing had not yet begun in full, but the seeds had been sown. In the jungle hideouts, Pol Pot watched his vision unfold. He did not need speeches or parades, only silence, fear, and the absolute obedience of a nation about to be consumed by its own revolution. The dream of Year Zero had turned into a nightmare. From 1975 to 1979, Pol Pot's regime unleashed a reign of terror across Cambodia, one driven by a vision so twisted that it devoured the very soul of the nation. The Khmer Rouge, fueled by radical ideology and unyielding paranoia, set out to remake society from the ground up. Cities were abandoned, their buildings left to rot and crumble. The once bustling streets of Phnom Penh were overgrown with weeds as the population was forced into the countryside. Factories were shuttered, schools emptied, and hospitals reduced to lifeless shells. Money was abolished, books were burned, and families were torn apart, all in the name of building a pure agrarian utopia. The people became little more than slaves to the revolution, laboring day and night in vast collective farms. Bent over rice paddies under the scorching sun, men, women, and children alike worked until their bodies gave out. Starvation became a constant companion, as food was rationed to the barest minimum. Disease spread unchecked through labor camps, and medicine was forbidden, a symbol of the corrupt past. But labor was not the only sentence to death. Pol Pot's regime sought to purify the nation by rooting out enemies, both real and imagined. Intellectuals, professionals, teachers, and anyone deemed a threat to the new order were systematically hunted down. Simply wearing glasses or speaking a foreign language could mark someone as an intellectual, and therefore an enemy. Ethnic minorities, particularly Vietnamese, Cham Muslims, and Chinese, were targeted mercilessly. The interrogations were ruthless, the executions brutal. S21 prison, Tuol Sleng, became a symbol of terror, where prisoners were tortured into false confessions before being taken to the killing fields, open graves where they were beaten to death to save bullets. The earth became heavy with the weight of over 1.7 to 2 million dead, a quarter of Cambodia's population, killed by starvation, forced labor, disease, and execution. Meanwhile, Pol Pot remained hidden, a spectral presence directing this vast machinery of death. He saw betrayal everywhere, ordering purges even among his most loyal followers. Ministers, generals, and lifelong comrades were dragged away in the night, accused of treason and tortured to death. Cambodia became a land of whispers and fear, where trust no longer existed. Children informed on parents, neighbors accused neighbors, all trying to prove their loyalty to the invisible, ever-watchful regime. The once vibrant heart of Cambodia had become a vast graveyard, its people broken and hollow-eyed, praying only to survive another day. In the shadow of Pol Pot's monstrous dream, the nation lay dying, silent and terrified under the suffocating grip of the Khmer Rouge. The winds of change howled through Cambodia in January 1979. After nearly 4 years of unimaginable horror, The earth itself seemed to shudder as Vietnamese forces swept across the border, their guns thundering through the dense jungles and across the desolate killing fields. The iron grip of Pol Pot's regime was about to be shattered. The Khmer Rouge, once so fearsome and unyielding, crumbled beneath the sheer force of the Vietnamese invasion. Cities long abandoned echoed with gunfire as Vietnamese troops marched into Phnom Penh. The capital, once emptied of life, now felt the breath of liberation. Ragged survivors crept out from hiding, dazed and broken, unsure whether to fear this new army or cling to it as saviors. Meanwhile, Pol Pot, paranoid and unrepentant, fled into the jungles, accompanied by the shattered remnants of his loyalists. His grand vision of a pure agrarian utopia lay in ruins, exposed as a monstrous nightmare. But even as his regime collapsed, his hatred burned on. From hidden camps along the Thai-Cambodian border, he plotted revenge, refusing to accept defeat. In the dense, suffocating foliage, he transformed from a dictator into a guerrilla warlord, orchestrating sporadic attacks and clinging to the dream of reclaiming power. The jungles became his fortress and his prison, a place where he could only dream of the broken nation he had once ruled with an iron fist. The world condemned him, his name becoming synonymous with genocide and horror. Yet even in defeat, Pol Pot refused to see himself as the architect of tragedy. To him, it was betrayal, enemies, and traitors, never his own hand, that had undone his revolution. As Cambodia slowly emerged from the shadows of his terror, rebuilding from the ashes, Pol Pot remained a ghost, hunted, reviled, but never brought to justice. The jungle that had once sheltered his revolution now swallowed his legacy of blood, leaving behind the echoes of grief and the shattered lives of millions. By 1997, the once feared Pol Pot had become a frail, aging ghost, haunted not only by the millions of lives he had destroyed, but also by the crumbling loyalty of his own followers. The Khmer Rouge, fractured and desperate, had long lost its grip on power. Deep in the jungles along the Thai-Cambodian border, the movement that once terrorized a nation was now a fractured band of weary fighters. Then came the final betrayal. Amid growing dissent within the ranks, Pol Pot ordered the execution of his trusted lieutenant, Sun Sen, accusing him of treason. But this act of paranoia backfired. The remaining Khmer Rouge commanders, realizing their leader had descended into madness, decided to act. They could no longer endure the whims of a man who had become a shadow of his former self, a leader now driven by fear rather than vision. In a swift, quiet coup, Pol Pot was arrested by his own comrades and placed under house arrest, a pitiful end for a man who once commanded absolute power. Confined to a bamboo hut, guarded by those who once followed him without question, Pol Pot was forced to confront the bitter reality. He had been abandoned by his revolution. Under house arrest, he was no longer the brother number one, but just an old, bitter man, condemned not by a foreign power or an international court, but by the very movement he had created. His eyes, once filled with the fire of ideology, now seemed hollow, staring out at the dense, suffocating jungle that had become his final prison. The world caught whispers of his downfall, but justice never came. Pol Pot's legacy was written not in trials or verdicts, but in the bleached bones and silent fields of Cambodia, a testament to the nightmare he had unleashed. The architect of the killing fields now sat alone, trapped in his own mind, waiting for death to claim what vengeance could not. In the dense, suffocating jungles of northern Cambodia, under a moonless sky, Pol Pot lay on a crude wooden bed, his body frail and wasted. The man who once ruled with an iron fist, whose word meant life or death for millions, was now just a sick, broken old man, forgotten by the world, abandoned by his comrades. Outside his shack, crickets sang their restless tune, unaware that history's bloodiest dreamer was drawing his final breaths. Since his house arrest a year earlier, Pol Pot had lived in bitter isolation, his mind drifting between memories of power and the grim reality of his downfall. The Khmer Rouge, once feared, now fractured, had collapsed around him. On that fateful night, April 15, 1998, rumors swirled of his imminent capture by Cambodian forces. Perhaps it was fear of facing justice, or the bitter realization that his revolution had failed, that finally broke his will. In the stillness of that night, his heart stopped beating. Whether from natural causes, suicide, or poison, no one could say for certain. His captors reported he had died of a heart attack, but whispers of a forced death to silence him lingered. As dawn broke, his body lay wrapped in a simple sheet, hastily cremated on a pile of dry wood and old tires. There was no ceremony, no monument, just a flicker of fire in the jungle, consuming the remains of a man who had consumed a nation. The smoke rose into the sky, twisting through the trees like the spirits of the countless souls he had condemned to death. No trial, no confession, no justice. Only ashes scattered among the roots and leaves of a jungle that had hidden his crimes, and in the end, swallowed him whole. The world would learn of his death with indifference, some disbelieving, some relieved. The monster of Cambodia was gone, leaving behind only haunted memories and endless grief. His dreams of revolution had died long before he did, crushed under the weight of their own brutality. And so ended the life of Pol Pot, not with the roar of revolution, but with the quiet, unceremonious end of a tyrant whose legacy would forever stain Cambodia's soil.